All right, so I'll be talking about App Engine and with a focus about App Engine for startups and why it's so awesome. Before I start, just a quick introduction. So I'm coming from the beautiful GDG Berlin. You can tell my accent, I'm not German. So je peux le faire en français si vous voulez. No? So yeah, my English, sometimes there's a French tone in it. If you don't understand, please and I'll be very happy to rephrase and to do it again. So yeah, quick word about myself. So GDG Berlin leader with Stefan over there, but also I'm running my own startup, SnapEngage. We're a small company, we're about 10 people now, and we do live chat for websites. And that's, I'll be talking a lot about scalability of web application. That's something very important for us. We are a widget on many customer websites, and we have no way to predict what will be the load of these customers at any point in time. So scalability is something difficult for everybody, but for us it's even more because we have no way to forecast. So I've been using App Engine for quite a long time. At SnapEngage, we started 3.5 years ago in App Engine, but before that, I used to contract for Google for doing some smart ads. It was the very early days of App Engine and Python, but still in early beta, and that's why I jumped on it, and I loved it. Before that, I did, like most of you guys here, most likely some PHP as well, some MySQL, and with all the nightmare that goes with killing these type of things. And no, that's not what I meant to do. So, here. Yeah. So okay, that's what I want to cover today. We do some quick move back in the history to see how we used to do application scaling in the past and kind of identify the difficulties. Then I'll be talking about the famous pyramid of infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and then going to App Engine. Just how many people here are using App Engine today? Yeah, okay. I'll do a brief overview of the platform, so people are using it today will be able to grasp what it is about. I'll cover briefly what the API and services that App Engine offers are. And then I'll go more into details about sales practices, stuff we learned at SnapEngage, going through for 3.5 years of App Engine Java. What are the main things people coming to App Engine now, the startups should think about for the design. And something I'll finish up, which should be pretty quick, is many events I go to when I talk about App Engine, there's always people in the room saying, yes, but it's not good because of this and that. And I'll focus on these buts and try to explain to you why this stuff is also true. But you can also answer these people when you deal with them, and you can evangelize about App Engine as well. Okay, this lamp trop cher for is something we need to press someone to get it up? Or? No, maybe okay. That's how it is. Okay, so it's not this lamp. Alright, so before App Engine, you're not too young here as I am, so you probably dealt with that in the past. About 15 years ago, I had a great idea about a new product for the web. What did we have to do? So first, we had to find a co-location, buy some servers, put them in the rack, install the OS, and a lot of work. Before you can put even a line of code to run, on the web, you had to do all this hardware installation. It was painful, complicated, and you are not doing anything for your product by doing this type of stuff. And so at the time, the Slashdot was a big place to advertise on get rich people about the application. The day you were on the front end of Slashdot, your little racks here was smoking, you had to run in there, and if you're in Europe and posting in the US at the middle of the night, put more server, put more wiring, it was extremely complex to do. Then, our lives got a bit easier when people introduced the virtual private servers. The famous one there was EC2 from Amazon. When this stuff was introduced, all the hardware part of it was abstracted from us, which was great because we are software developers. We don't like dealing with big racks, really. So what happened at this point is people very good at dealing with servers, with infrastructure. they put in place these big server farms, and they are renting a virtual machine on these servers. So the good stuff about that is, for us, less work on the hardware side, but we still have to install the OSs. So you have to install Linux or BSD or whatever you want to do, and then manage the patches, because these servers, there's always security holes, so you have to patch on time. You still have to deal with scalability, because when the traffic grows, you have to put more virtual machines. It's much easier than buying racks of servers, but it's still a lot of work to do for us. So scalability, that's what's still a challenge. And just to illustrate, if some of you have never scaled an application yet, a few slides have to explain that. So let's take a concrete example. You are designing an Android application, and you need a backend to communicate with your app. So typically, let's like a PHP work. You will have a web server running PHP, or to be a Tomcat in Java if you want, and then you have a database, so you have a single that will be your MySQL database. So right now it's just you, your friend, your coding kids. You bought an EC2 micro machine, everything works fine. But you want to open the beta to people in this room, some friends, and say, okay, let's build the beta. We need something bigger than that. So what do? You go back to the dashboard, and you say, I need a bigger machine. Up, you scale it up, and now your machine restarts with more memory, more CPU, more disk space. Then you open the beta to more people. Same thing, CPU usage is too high, so you move the slider up again, and you end up with a bigger machine. Still, same architecture, you have your database and your web server. But now, you are about to be Slashdot, or to have something big in your company. And in order to, you are already on the large instance type of what your product you are on. So how do you scale? It's not as easy as the slider up, you're all the way up already. So typically, when you are there, it's easy. You move your database on one hand, you move your web server on the other hand. You change the local host you have in the database to the IP address. Okay, but not too bad. But then still, the user base is growing, more people are using the application, your database is out of memory almost, the web server is crawling to death. So then you need to continue growing. So what do you do now? Typically, you will put a load balancer up front, put two different servers, and yeah, it's starting to get complicated here. And while you're doing that, you're spending hours of your time not creating nice application for your users. So you're reinventing the wheel of something that is not the core of your startup. That's pretty much a waste of time. And stuff gets very complicated because at this point, then since your server are getting too slow, the database is crawling as well, and very quickly you end up with something like that. And that's still just the beginning. So the point here is, scaling application is complex. If you do something not just for you and your friends, if you want to do public or an application available to the world, you will have to deal with that. And one more time, it's not the core of your business. Doing this type of stuff, if you do it and your competitor does the same thing, you are both wasting time. So you probably heard about this concept of lean startup, doing a startup with a minimal viable product. The goal of this type of thinking is you want to go to the market very quickly, and you want to do it with as least, as a small team as possible, you want as a small budget as possible. If you work on this problem, you need most likely PhD that are, done in the past, very expensive people, and people focus on that. So, again, that's not what you want to do. So, that's where now we are moving to explain a little bit the stack of different platforms hosting. So, it's a pretty old slide here. I got the slides from Google from 2009, but it's still true today. It's a good example of, you can barely see it to right. So okay, let's go through the stack real quick. So at the bottom level, we have infrastructure as a service. And that's why we talked earlier, the EC2 product from Amazon, for example, is at this place you have virtual machines that you still have to manage yourself. You have to instantiate when you need them, and you have to load balance them. So most providers at the IaaS level, they provide you as a load balancer, but still a lot of work at the infrastructure level for you to scale your application. On top of that, that's where we have App Engine, the application platform as a service. This system here, you push your application to it, And the platform will do the scaling for you. So they will instantiate virtual machines when needed, they will kill them when needed. The database as well, whichever it is, will be scaling your needs. And all the services are scaling for you. And on top of that, it's typically most startups today are focused on doing software as a service. So it's what you provide to your customers. It could be a CRM, it could be a live chat like we do, it could be a game to your users. So it's, that's your end product. So that's pretty much the stack, what you are doing as a startup most of the time, what App Engine is doing, and below is the lower level. Any question on that? Alright, so that being said, now I'm moving to App Engine, and especially what does the App Engine box, they show it, provide you with. So, many components. The first one is the SDK. So whether you use Java, Python, or even Go now, you have something to develop the application to a machine and run the application locally on your machine, debugging, testing, and everything you want. So it's a pretty complete system, for all the developers in your team to work with. They provide you the hardware. When you want to deploy this application to the cloud, you don't have to buy anything. Everything is virtualized. The servers are there, but you don't have to mess with them. Networking. So that's something I put together there because that's pretty important. With App Engine, so you have servers right now. You pick either if you want servers in the US or in Europe. If you are some premier customer, you can pick servers in Europe as well. But they don't tell you exactly where they are. It's located on one of the continents. But your customers are most likely spread around the world. You may have customers in Asia, even in Australia, and still, if you have servers in the US, the people in Australia will still see a very low latency to your application because Google is using the global network to route the traffic from whoever the user is, or wherever the user is, directly to your app on their own low latency network. That's something that I don't think many other operators have today. To give you a complete example, if you go and ping snapengage.com from Australia, you will see a ping time about 10-20 milliseconds, even though the servers are in the US, because there's a lot of front-end cache located close to the user. So that's a very big benefit, something to think about as well. If you were to do your infrastructure yourself, you have to think about CDNs and all this type of other stuff on top of your infrastructure for hosting. I'm not even sure Google is very good to advertise this awesome feature. The operating system, of course, they provide a runtime environment. They say it's a Linux flavor, but for you it doesn't matter. It's completely abstracted. They do the patching for you. They do, any fix as well as the kernel level, all these things. Sometimes for geeks, they would like to get more of that, but honestly, you're focusing on your startup, your customers, and this is taken care of. So runtime, you have maybe a small limitation here. As of today, there's 3 runtimes to pick from. Python, which is the most mature for sure because this was introduced at the beginning. Then they introduced Java, which now that's what we use at Engage. It's extremely mature as well in my opinion. Go is the own language from Google, very good for concurrency and all these things. It's still experimental, so people in universities in school are using it for sure. I don't know yet anybody using that for production, but it's there. So something.
Yeah, we're using it for production.
Oh, you do?
Oh, I mean, not App Engine, but we're
Go.
Since a few months we're writing our new stuff with Go. It's very cool.
Yeah, we use it. You use them here? Okay, nice. Okay. Yeah, you're the first 2 people I did that. And so. Okay, maybe you can talk a bit later. So, okay, there's people using Go in production. That's uncorrected.
But we're pre-commercial, which is kind of different.
Hey, congrats, because it's a big heap of place, to jump on something like that. Nice. Static serving as well. When you do application, you have images, JavaScript, you need to serve all that. For you, you don't have to think about it. When you deploy to App Engine, Google will separate what is dynamic and what is static, and they will make the serving of your static content as fast as can be. It will be cached somewhere else, so you don't pay any CPU cost for serving static content. That's, again, having yourself abstracted from anything that you don't need to think about. So on top of this, they also provide a lot of services which are meant to make you efficient. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. We'll go into some examples of these services, but you have more than just a web serving application. You have a lot of extra stuff. So yeah, you can think about your app again, not about redeveloping this. And load balancing and fault tolerance, it's of course very important because your paying customers don't want you to be down. So if you were to manage a rack of servers, when the server goes down or you have to run there, this part of the job is done by the Googlers in the data centers. They have SLAs as well now for the product. We see happening during a period of time. Sometimes we switch application from one data center to the other. You see that because you see latency for a few minutes going higher because the traffic is being switched by the scheduler. It's completely transparent for you. Same thing. They do preventive maintenance on some data centers sometimes. It used to impact your app because they're putting you in read-only. It's not anymore the case. Now your app is switched to different data center. Again, very small latency increase for, but yeah, everything works fine. So again, as a small lean startup where you have a small team, it's extremely important that you have to think about this type of thing. Production, operation. In a typical company, you have a team focused on that. On the startup, you can afford for sure to have a team. So the founders, or you most likely will be having to have a pager or your cell phone ring at night if something goes wrong. Since we moved from App Engine and barely ever have wake-up call at night. Okay, I talked about services that Google App Engine provides you to make your application development fast. A few examples is Memcache. Probably I'm sure you heard about that. It's an easy storage of key value pair in memory. It's not meant to be persistent. You cannot expect that to be always there, but it's really meant to be a cache for your database access. So objects you often read in the database, you will put them in Memcache, and you will check first, do we have that in Memcache, and if so, you don't hit the backend. It's very effective on App Engine. The quota is fairly generous, and they don't charge extra anymore for that. You don't pay any Memcache API calls, it's just part of the package. They provide, of course, a persistent data store, which is based on Bigtable. We talked about that, but same thing. It's easy for you because you don't have to think of scaling. Versus when you use an SQL database, you have to think about the size that your database will go up to because you have to size the machine and everything. Here, it's supposed to go to infinity. You don't have to. And the performance of the system is not very fast, but it's linear. You won't get slower as your data set grows. They provide also services for URL fetching. You want to do a get and post to other services around you, which you will have to do most likely to other applications. And it's a distributed fetch system, not blocking on everything. It's pretty well done. You can send email, you can send and receive XMPP messages. We talk about task queue more in detail. So you have a complete set of things that make your development team very effective. You think at a high level about your application, not about recreating all these low-level things as a software. And this one is important as well. For Python, I'm not very familiar, so I cannot tell you for Python, but for Java, they did a pretty nice job in mapping their services that are Google specific, right? All this at the level of the Google infrastructure. They map those to standard Java APIs. So for example, if you take Memcache, they use the Java Cache API. So let's say you have some legacy code that you wrote for the project, you can probably port that very easily to App Engine thanks to this mapping. For sending emails, something with Javax Mail. For doing interaction with other services outside, it's a JavaNet URL. Data store, GDO or GPA, it's your choice. Most people I know are using GDO because I think it's more popular. And your complete web serving container is a servlet based. So it's a very standard Java stuff. If you did some Tomcat and the past. So I think I would say that it's a very nice thing from Google. They could have just provided you the low level and just say, okay, you have to rethink everything you've done before and use our API. No, they took the time to map that to the standard compliance layers. All right, I'll dive a bit further now in some of these areas. So key one is data store, because you will have to store data, and back to your Android application, you have user account you need to keep, you have to keep usage of your application and stuff. So you need data storage that is persistent, reliable, and everything. So definitely Google with Gmail, Google Docs, and all these things have expertise in storing a lot of massive data sets. So they don't explain very clearly or in details what the data store app engine is, but it's definitely relying on the low-level big table stuff of Google. So it's not, if you're coming from an SQL background, it's nothing like that. It's definitely more like a big sorted array. So you have to rethink a little bit. Your queries cannot be done the same way as SQL, because the goal is any data you put in there is to be able to be retrieved no matter the size of the data set in a consistent way. So you define which are the indexes you want to do, and if you have a push an object in the data store, they will compute the indexes for you. So yeah, and it's distributed. When you push your object, it's not just written to one system at one time. They will write, I think it's 2 or 3 at the minimum across different geographical locations. So if there's an outage happening, in the Atlanta center, you will switch to maybe North Carolina or something. What is? Yeah, there's no downtime. If they have to go down for a power outage or for plant maintenance, your data are still available because they will switch you directly based on latency. Something that happens quite often is, let's say there's a goof happening in data centers are doing a lot of work for lots of projects, and is slowing down the compute infrastructure. As soon as the scheduler finds the latency is reaching a point higher than expected, the system automatically switches your data store usage to the different data center that is ready for use. So it works pretty well. One thing that we were a bit surprised at the beginning is it's definitely not as fast as a local SQL server, which it's pretty obvious because it's a big distributed system. So you have to think about your application architecture around that. If you try to do a lot of database access, especially a lot of write, it will be expensive and it will be slow. So when you design your data flow, you have to really focus on that. How can I minimize writing to the database? And I also have to think when I write something, I need to minimize reading as well. So that's what Memcache needs to play. You have to, it's not nothing complex, and I'm pretty sure anybody doing outside App Engine, some large-scale database application have to think of the same problems. To me, it's pretty smart stuff. In Python, not Java, but Python, they even something that did a new API now, which has the Memcache built in. When you do a database write, they will do the Memcache write the same time for you. When you do the read, they will do the lookup first in Memcache. So it's pretty nice, again, putting the stuff at a higher level for you. For Java, we don't have that yet. It's still on you to decide when Memcache needs to be used or not. Okay, that's true. So, very important thing is that App Engine, to be scalable, they have to put some limitation on the runtime or the time to live of serving instance. So, in the early days, it was extremely short. Your request had to be completed in something like maybe 1 or 5 seconds. So meaning when the web browser was hitting your App Engine instance, your process, your Java process running had to terminate within 5 seconds or something like that. So they push it to 30 seconds, I believe now it's 60 seconds. You still have to make sure your process are as quick as possible, because I think the rule of thumb is if you have an average higher than 1 second for your web serving, your app will be penalized because it won't be priority. It won't be serving priority because the cutoff is 1 second. If you go below 1 second, you're fine. If you go above, you have some penalty applied to you. So many things you do cannot be done in 1 second. It's a pretty short period of time. Like if you want to send an email, for example, or if you want to talk to you integrate to Salesforce, for example, a big complex system with many API codes, in 1 second it's not doable in cases. So that's why the task queue comes into play. You would defer processing to asynchronous process. So you can return to the user, you tell them, yeah, okay, thank you, we got the request, now it's being processed, and you spin kind of another process that will be doing the background of work. Doing that, as developers we can do it, but Google provides a very nice framework for that. It's just another servlet that you would call from your application using a small API call. The good stuff about that is this task queue being run in the background doesn't have the limitation of 60 seconds or 30 seconds. It can run for, I believe, it's up to 10 minutes. Yeah, maybe 10 minutes now. So again, they've been increasing this, over the years. So in 10 minutes, you definitely have time really to talk to, to the external system. Even if you have to retry, it's fine. Even better than that, if let's say you, again, this example, you're talking to Salesforce.com, so the API, trying to create a ticket in the help desk system, and bad luck, right now Salesforce is down in maintenance. The task queue system of Google Web Engine has built in the retry process. So you can just, you've realized, oh, no luck, they are down at Salesforce, you would just put a 500 response to the HTTP of your servlet. It tells Google, retry later. And they have already the scheduler regular properly, they retry a lot at the beginning, and then they slow down the retry so that they do not, the layer of service, the system at the other end. So extremely easy to do, again, it's just one line of Java code to say, okay, let's retry later by doing this answer 500 on the HTTP side. So, yeah, honestly, I didn't use task queue much in the past, coming from a different background. People I talk to usually are using RabbitMQ. If you it's a one popular system, you don't use App Engine to do the same things. Here it's there for you, very reliable, very simple. So yeah, it's and again it's my item is function pull queue. That's something they introduced maybe a year ago. But by default, when you create a queue, App Engine will do the runtime for you. They will execute the queue, the task for the queue, and they will retry. If you want to manage the unqueuing, you could do it as well with the pull queue. You would then send this call to queue actions, and using a cron job, for example, you could take the 10 top elements in the queue and do it yourself. So more flexibility. But honestly, most of the time, the push queue that you want to do is just defer some processing to asynchronous mode and give it more time to run because you don't need it to be done right away. Okay, GWT, that's extremely important. That's only for Java developers here. For Python, that's not an equivalent. But when we do web app, so maybe not Android, but more the web application, the backend is important for sure. That's where the application processing is done, where you do the storage. But for the end user, the visible part in the browser, the front end, is critical. It's to be nice, easy, drag and drop, and everything you want. Doing that in JavaScript, it's complex because Firefox compared to Internet Explorer don't behave the same. So you use framework like jQuery and stuff like that. So it's possible to do, but if you have a nice big app, something like a Gmail or something like that, it's a real nightmare to maintain usually. So you need a lot of rigorous processes to deal with JavaScript. With GWT, Google let you write your front-end code in Java, and they cross-compile that to JavaScript with optimized files for different targets. So when you compile, application, we have several apps in Web, but when we compile, we have, I believe, 6 different sets of JavaScript that are loaded dynamically based on the browser type. First the size of JavaScript is optimized. They of course compressed everything, they hope first with the JavaScript and everything. But yeah, you end up with optimized code that will run just fine on different platforms. The other big benefit of that is for debugging. Debugging JavaScript, now you have a pretty nice debugging tool in the browser, but if your backend is written in Java and your frontend is also written in Java cross-compiled, you can put in Eclipse a breakpoint in your Java code, and with an emulation mode of GWT with Eclipse in the browser, you can step in your code in Java while it's running in JavaScript. So this stuff for Java developer, it's more than awesome. It's you have one single tool, one single environment to do both back and front end. So, yep.
And we went down this path to GWT.
Yeah.
Really loved it, and then.
And App Engine. Because GWT is for front-end development, right?
Okay.
So I thought you just do your GWT, whatever, compile the JavaScript, and then upload that JavaScript to App Engine. So where's the connection between it?
The connection is in the SDK, the little package you get when you get App Engine. It's already pre-packaged in there. So you get JWT as not even to think about anything more, it's there. And the other good stuff is the front and back-end communication with App Engine, with started and stuff, it's really easy. They try the template. So not a big deal. Doing it yourself with Tomcat is also fairly easy. It's one little step easier.
So for example, if I write my UI myself in JavaScript, I have to let the docs how to do the API call.
Exactly.
So in GWT, I just call Java functions in the SDK.
Pretty much, yeah.
And it's okay.
Yeah. And even a bit further than that, bridging to this topic, if you want to do real-time communication, like long polling communication between your web application and your backend, they have the channel API, which is a long polling implementation of App Engine. It is there very easily implemented in Git. So if you want to do that, you have a comment server, for example, it will be much more work for you to do with your outside App Engine application. So there is some glue there for you to be effective.
Yeah.
But you have a good point. If you don't or can use App Engine for your project, you can still use Git, as your framework for doing the front-end development.
Can I? I don't want to
No, but make it attractive.
Fine. I don't actually understand what App Engine is. I have no concept of what it does for you.
So App Engine is for you, it's the hosting platform for your application. It's a hosting. Yeah. So today, if you, let's say you want to do a new app, if you put App Engine away from the equation, you would go to Amazon Web Services, or you would go to Heroku, you would go to, I don't know which other provider here in Zurich, but there's most likely some hosting people. And with this type of stuff, you either rent a rack, you rent maybe a server, or maybe a virtual machine. That's what you usually. They go one step above that, where you rent application hosting, where you push your application, and everything that is system administration level related is handled for you. So managing all this machine, managing all the OSs, managing the scalability. When you get more requests, the scheduler will light up more instances for you. You don't have to do anything. When your app traffic goes down, after some time, they see they don't use all these machines, they turn them off for you, you don't get billed. So it's
sorry, so we're pre-production, so we haven't hit the scaling problem yet.
No, but
we can go into App Engine from there's no overhead to not having started within App Engine, or is that?
That could be, because the JVM, your Java, no.
But no, JavaScript made well, let's say we were, and we moved towards JavaScript.
But what is your backend? Your backend?
MongoDB and SQL.
And it's what, PHP or what language?
Almost all.
Oh, okay, not SQL. Okay, no, sorry, Node.js. Yeah, so there I think people have tried to run some Node.js using Java cross-compilation, but for you, if you are right now on Node.js, I think you're pretty much locked away from App Engine, because there is no Node.js runtime right now.
Okay.
So, yeah. Anybody doing Node.js on App Engine here? No. Okay. So no need to know. I'm sure some people tried it, but other than that, Ruby on Rails, for example, people wanted to do Ruby on App Engine, so what they are doing is JRuby, the Java implementation of Ruby. So you have some layers of stuff that make the stuff not efficient, because so it's possible, you can try, but it's not seriously. So for you,
so there is an overhead if we want to take
it. And also you will be on a kind of unsupported mode, because there is no Googlers optimizing the stuff for Node.js, or maybe they are, but they're not telling us yet. Yeah. But so since you are already on a different path, you probably. But for other projects, think about it. If you have Java, Python, or Go competencies in your company, it's and if you foresee that scalability will be difficult, if you're doing an application that you know very well, you need 2 servers and that's it, because you will have one big customer, which is a bank, and that's all. Then maybe you don't need that. It's nice. But if you know you're doing a consumer front-facing application where you know that it will explode, then that's so nice.
that's exactly. We're B2B, so we'd be delighted to have 100 customers. This would be more than we could. Okay.
So maybe one machine will do it.
Yeah. Well.
Okay.
3.
3. Yeah, but 3 is still easy to manage. All right. But it's still something interesting to think about, though. But probably not since you went Node.js. It's okay, so real communication, we have also some very nice tooling for that. So Channel API, as I said, is a long polling version of App Engine. XMPP, most of you probably know Jabber or it's a protocol well used for IM, for doing instant messaging across users. One application we can use for XMPP as well is for server-to-server communication. It's a pretty nice protocol to exchange packets. So yeah, it's a very simple, very abstracted API that they have an App Engine. In one call, you just send packets. The incoming addresses for your XMPP are mapped to a servlet, so it's just, again, nothing complicated to learn. Your servlet receives the packet and you just get the parsing of the messages. So, very nicely done. And yeah, Google with Google Talk has extensive experience in this area, so that makes sense. There are many services. I won't go through all of them, but some they added recently, which really made a difference, is HTTPS support, SSL for your own domain. For a long time, we didn't have that. So to do SSL, you had to do your application ID.appspot.com, which didn't give a good, trusted view for your customers. So I think they were dealing with an issue with a certificate. You have an IP address that is kind of tied to it and all this stuff. So they didn't, but they did it very nicely. The same infrastructure with different access points in the world will route the traffic to your app. Is working also for SSL. So the low latency that you ping your app from anywhere in a very short latency applies there as well. So it's a little extra cost, something like probably $1 or $2 a day extra to get the virtual IP address SSL, but it's well worth it. And it's honestly, once that we do that, that was one of the main concerns we had, and now, well, happy campers. App Engine backend. So I explained the front-end serving is limited to 30 or 60 seconds, I'm not even sure, because again, the mindset is you have to think, I need to serve this request in less than a second, so that's what I'm focusing on. But if you need more processing, or longer processing, you have the task queues, which are great, but let's say you want to do a weekly report, you know that crunching all the data will take 2 or 3 hours of processing. You can allocate instances that are running your code that are not time limited by any means. So they are yours, as long as you keep them up, they will be running for you. That's the backend, and it completed the tool set pretty well. So now, reporting or CPU intensive computation is there for you as well. I mentioned that the data store of App Engine, the big table-based things, is there, but it's slow, compared to your local SQL machine or your local MongoDB machine, and expensive. But it's definitive, it's reliable and everything. If you don't need the scalability, like you have a data store that will never grow bigger than that, you can get the service named Google Cloud SQL, which is a SQL database. So all the nice query you knew about, this the join, everything you can do with that. And you have 2 different billing methods for that. Either you pay per usage or you pay a fixed cost for a fixed instance. So we don't do that yet, but it's something that definitely is interesting for several applications. Like if you want to do a very fast memory-driven database, something with App Engine data store won't work very well for you. So with that, if you want to allocate a SQL server with enough memory to fit your complete data store or data set in memory, you have a very, very fast system now that will work very well. Cloud storage is if you want to store static content, not in your app as part of the deployment, but something you generate on the fly or storing a file that your customer uploads. They introduced a cloud storage for developers. It's pretty much like S3 from Amazon. So yeah, it's very much, even at the API level, the REST API is the same as the Amazon API. But for App Engine, to make it even more appealing, they implemented the file API of Java. So you can, just the same way you write a file, you can write to the cloud with a file API. So it's pretty nice. It's still in preview. Just something also to keep in mind. When you work with App Engine, they give you a lot of services in preview mode. Preview, you have to think it's a beta type of stage. A couple of weeks ago, we had the preview of the file API for writing to the cloud for some projects. They sent us emails saying, please double check your data. Everything you did as writes during this time period may be corrupted. So,
yeah, maybe that's a
maybe, exactly. You have to check. They're not for sure, but there's a likelihood there's some corruption. So when it's in preview, yeah, don't use customer critical features as preview API for sure. And there are many more, two that are very interesting. Prediction API here, so Google they are very big on machine learning systems, and they expose an API that lets you push huge amount of data, what they call the big data, the big store, and then analyze that and extract rules from it. So all the machine learning expertise, and they have PhDs and PhDs at Google working on that. For you, it's available as an abstractive API. So, again, for a small startup, you don't have all this PhD in-house usually. It's nice to use. I think it's still preview as well. It's pretty nice, nice stuff. Full text search, of course, Google, text text search is good. They also have an API for that. When you do a commit to data store, you send like let's say an article in there. You can also ask them to index that for text search. So you don't have to do all this lexical parsing yourself and splitting and stuff. So yeah, it's keeping you away from the gory detail. It's nice.
Oh, sure. What's the difference between the Google Cloud Storage and Google Drive? They sound extremely similar.
You're right, they sound extremely similar, and Google Drive has an API as well, but so Google Drive is not integrated with the file API, for example. So you can just write a Java file to the drive yet. Honestly, then maybe the same stuff at the bottom level, right?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Because they do the same. I mean, Google Drive adds the whole UI and stuff, but for the file storage, it's.
You should tie it over.
They have a UI as well. They have a UI pretty much like S3, where you can see your file, DDM, and everything. So, yeah, pretty much the same thing. They have stuff as well. You can decide where the file would be. No, they don't decide. But yeah, you have cache serving different places in the world as well. So, it's really designed as a CDN data store. So Drive is more for your own usage, right? It's not to search the world.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
I guess so. I think Drive is more intended for actually interactive use. People open files, save files.
Right. So yeah, but yeah, definitely you're right. It's a center of services for sure.
Is the preview also for cloud storage or only with integration?
No, the cloud storage is production. The preview is writing as an easy way, as a Java file way. That's the only stuff that, a few weeks ago they said was productive. If you use the REST API, I'm very, very almost sure that it's not in preview. But,
okay. Text search API again, straight parallel to this Drive.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. The same type of services. XDP is really focused on serving fast for everybody in the world, where the Drive is meant for you and your friends to exchange. I think the last step I want to cover is some best practices, stuff that we learned kind of the hard way using the platform for a few years. And I've got 10, 15 minutes left. That should be good. The data store. So I think I covered that extensively already. It's good, it's reliable, but it's slow. It's slow because, by design, you don't have the database on one machine. It's spread around many machines, different data centers, so it cannot be fast by definition, but it's consistent. So that's a good thing for you. Something that you will learn is when you create an object, the object you push, which is, as I said, just an entry in a map or in an array, basically speaking, you get or you set a specific ID of this object. This ID, you have to pick that carefully because looking up this object later on by this ID is a preferred method. You can do search on other fields of the object, but it would be potentially slower, more expensive as well because there's more API calls. And there is a little thing that could be big to keep in mind is the data store is eventually consistent. Again, this concept of you write the object, it doesn't get written just on one machine hard drive, but it's written on several machines across big data center and even across different data centers. So when you do a lookup, if you look up by one of the other fields or one of the other members of your object, this one are indexed through the different set of indexes. So when you, let's say I write right now an object, and half a second later I try to find the same object through this other member, which is the index, it may not be there yet. So it will be there eventually, but it's not always there yet. So when you look up by the real ID of the object, it will always be there.
It's just like the primary unique key.
Exactly. In SQL, exactly. Yeah. So, but in SQL, you won't get a not found, right?
Right.
when you commit, when it's committed, it's there because it's in the same machine, right? So that's something to keep in mind. The primary unique key, as you said, it's a pretty good definition. It's how you want to search for cost, for speed, and also for consistency. And at Kubernetes eventually try to minimize how much you write, because writing is more important than reading, of course. And also use Memcache extensively. Some numbers here from what we've seen. Writing to Memcache is 10 times faster than writing to the database. And the read is also the 5x difference in read speed. So, okay. Any question on the store? No? Exception. So I think as Java developer, you're probably very familiar with dealing with exception. It's easy though to write quickly some application to just not catch exception that are not feeling important to you. The thing is, you are on a massively distributed platform because you have many little virtual servers running many GVM for you, and stuff can go wrong. It can be a Google API, like in the data store, maybe it's not reachable this time, maybe the Memcache, the machine may be down. If you don't catch an exception, you'll be having a fake application obviously, and it will be random, right? For this user at this instance, something will be working. So they provide a large set of exceptions for every services they give you. You need to make sure you catch as much of that to have a consistent behavior of application. There is one exception that it's a must catch, and unfortunately Google is not great telling you about it. So that's, as I mentioned, when you run a front-end serving process, the servlet that people connect to, you have, and again, I'm not sure if it's 30 or 60 second runtime maximum. When you get close to which is limit, they raise, maybe it's half a second before, they raise this exception. It's a deadline exception. So that they are telling you, oh, watch out because you're just about to reach the limit and we are going to kill you. And so at this point you can catch it. You can catch the exception and terminate it properly. You have maybe half a second to do something.
Do you feel lucky, punk?
If you run, you won't be dead. If you don't run, then you get the bullet. The thing is, and that's what they don't say carefully, is on Java, when you have a multi-threaded application, and again, typically, your application on one virtual machine, you run multiple threads for serving. If Google Scheduler kills one of your threads because you are exceeding this stuff, chances are your JVM will go, bucket, it will be corrupted and stuff. Everything will fall down. So what it means, having one single thread exceeds, let's say the system was talking to Salesforce or sending an email, and the mail API was too slow. So this one little thread that is exceeding will be causing maybe the 20 or 30 other threads serving application to be killed at the same time. So when you're losing, an application, a big chunk of that, it's extremely damaging to your users. So I wish it would be a bit more clear because we learned that the hard way. We had erratic behavior sometimes at the beginning. And, so catch the exception, but the deadline exception, it's a must catch for sure. Something else is when the maintenance, they raise an exception for special features of the stuff, saying this one is not available right now. So it's not, it's not outage, it's planned. So it's something you can catch as well. It's less and less true. At the beginning, they were doing impacting maintenance once in a month. Now the maintenance really is transparent for you. So I think this one you can mostly forget. Don't forget this one. Or you will, or later on you remember, oh, Jérôme told me, I should listen more carefully. So something else. So Google, as I mentioned, provides all these need services to make you develop your application in a very high-level way, not really think about details. An expression is don't drink the Kool-Aid too much. Sometimes you have alternatives for these services. And I just want to give you some example. At SnapEngage, we could have used the Google APIs, but we use external API instead. And just give you an example. So what I want to say on this slide is think of your requirements. Maybe these are not fully met by what Google provides, and you need to find something external. So
I don't know if you will get the free lunch today. After saying.
Oh, no, Google, right?
No. I just said.
Google here? No, it's great, but again, maybe I put it the wrong way. But
that microphone.
Definitely that's a nice tool set. We just think about it. Sometimes, like, example, give you an example. Email API. So the App Engine lets you send emails, and with the emails, one issue we have at the beginning, we do a lot of transactional emails. Like we do a live chat, the live chat happens, and then we send a transcript of this live chat to the agents for later review, to manager. So we send a lot of those every day, every hours. And some customers told us, your emails don't get delivered, don't get them, they get in my spam folder, and there is no tool, the Google App Engine Mail API has no deliverability rating. Maybe they do now, but I don't think they're really that. So that's why we look at also solutions of SendGrid. They only do one thing, it's just an API to send emails. And they send you a report about what is the open rate, what is the bounce rate. If there's a bounce, there's a big log of why it's bouncing. If you have spam filter, for instance, they do some measurement of spam filtering ratios. And so what was the issue? We switched to SendGrid, and for us, it's solved the solution. Something else, geo-mapping. When we have a chat, we like to tell the agent that this chat is happening from Zurich to Sonam. So Google provides some basic geo-mapping. It's working pretty well. For some more targeted things, we use MaxMind, which is an API. It's a small REST services. You have a few minutes to do the API, the fetch API of Google. It's very good.
Will you be putting this up on the web afterwards so we can...
Yeah. I'll email my slides to whoever will be there. Or come see me. Give me your name, I can email you the slide if you want. They're just examples, again, there's many other stuff. One more we do is Precog, which is a tool where we push data to create stat visualization. Doing stat with App Engine is possible for sure, but if you want to do queries in the data store, the big table type of data store, to do statistics, that would be extremely time consuming. So we would probably, if we had to do it ourselves, I think we would have used Kerbal SQL instead. Would have been processing data on the fly, pushing to Kerbal SQL and doing visualization on that. So instead of, again, we're a small team, we don't want to spend too much resources, so we use an external service for that. We push data in real time. They use tons of MongoDB type of thing, and they do messaging of data and they do JavaScript visualization for us. Telephone, this one, Google doesn't even have something usable right now, so we use Twilio to create performance flow between the web visitor and the agent when they want to switch from a chat to a real phone call. So, and this, for example, there, it's extremely easy because all these APIs have REST type of APIs using the fetch functionality of Google, doing REST or post and get call is extremely simple. Okay.
And what does SnapEngage do?
We are a live chat company, so it's a little widget you put on your website. So on your new application that your customers can reach out to you, or you can reach out to your customer on your website to do either support or help. Support or sales. If you want to do sales, I think it's as well.
What's the name?
People know us or no?
No, we did this for our customers, but with hardware from Logitech or Cisco, not with the web solution. It would be nicer to have a web solution, but I think the problem was quality wasn't good enough. I don't know if they I don't know if they evaluated your company. I don't know.
Yeah. You mean for the phone part? Is this thing here? Just the phone or just the live chat?
Live, it's with video.
Oh, video. No, we want video for us. No, it's just it's text-based communication between user and customer, and we add the voice as well through a telephony through Twilio.
Okay.
Video is coming in the future, but I can't tell you some side story about it. Yeah.
What's the name already, your company?
It's company over there, or a t-shirt, SnapEngage. SnapEngage.com. Maybe I can show you some stuff if you want after, but let me go through the slide real quick. Other big important practices is support. You run an application, customers are paying for it. If you have trouble, let's say you did a bad design in your application, and now the performance are pretty bad. You can spend time on your own, try to learn, or you can buy the premium support from Google. They charge you $500 a month. It's for operational and developer support. They do both. So let's say you have a problem and it's not working well. You're not sure if it's your code, if it's get, and pretty quickly you have someone from Google coming back to you and say, okay, yeah, we identified the problem, we're working on it, we'll get that result in a few minutes. If it's a problem of code design, usually they try to handle it pretty well, troubleshoot, let's say performance is degrading right now, and you tell them, yeah, we did this change, they make some. They are pretty good, they have a nice overview of how it should be designed and how it should work, they can point you to the right direction. So if you want to have free support, they have free support as well through mailing lists, they have IRC, the real-time chat station once a month, they are doing Google Hangout as well now, with specific topics in mind. They do support on Stack Overflow, which is a portal for asking questions. There are several people in the team.
Are these App Engine specific?
Yeah. This is an App Engine specific topic for Stack Overflow. It has got many lists for also Google Groups. So yeah. And the Hangout, you can Hangout there, but they have once a month at least a Hangout for App Engine, maybe even more now. So you can attend. So they cover stuff pretty well. Something else, that Developer Advocate, I don't think we have one today here in Zurich, but they have in Zurich that guy, he's a French guy, very good guy. His name, I think it's Jeremy. Jeremy, and his role is to help young companies moving, or even bigger companies moving to App Engine. He'll be there to help you out, to answer questions and everything. So they do the reaching out, but I want to say this premium support at $500 a month, once you're in production with paying customers, it's very worth it because it enables even more stuff for you, like your billing, rather than charging a credit card every month, they can do billing through invoices so that you don't get shut down because you reach a limit on your credit card and something like that. So they are more flexible with you for sure, and it also opens up new stuff like deciding if you want your app in the US or in Europe for legal reason. It's only available if you are on this mode. So yeah, it gives you some more benefits. Oops. All right, my quick final thought, and probably almost over time. Kind of the myth. The stuff I hear when I talk to people, they use right now X or Y Z system, and okay, App Engine should be cool for you. So one thing I hear quite a lot is, yeah, but if I use App Engine, I'll be logged in App Engine, and if I don't like it anymore, I kind of move in, so it's a painful stuff. So honestly, when we did this move to App Engine for us, we didn't have the plan to move out. It's we're happy with it, but if we were not happy with it, we have Java source code using pretty much standard servlet and standard service on top of it. So yeah, it's not easy to move because you have to rethink your data store as well. Your GDO queries may not be optimized for a different system, but yeah, if I want to move from your local co-location here to Amazon, the same thing, I don't have to rethink the verification for many reasons. So lock-in, I think it's there everywhere. It's not there more than any feature. There are stuff also, Google gives you some special API which are not standard APIs, but like the Google account. Let's say you make the decision to enable the account management as Google account only. If you move out of App Engine, you would lose the API, obviously, but when you think about it, why would you use a Google account if you want to open the application for all customers in the world? So, so the main reason I hear about the login, in fact, I don't think it's very applied. So yeah, I want to say that. They don't do anything to you to sign a non-good. Cost. People said, yeah, cost was very, very good when they were in preview, it was so cheap, now it's too expensive. So we went through the price increase, it was in early or in mid-2011. So definitely before the preview mode, when there was no SLA, and there was a maintenance period where your app was going down for about an hour, scheduled maintenance. Yeah, it was dirt cheap, but it was so cheap, it was crazy, right? So when they did the price increase, they pretty much, they did a research to align the pricing to what is the market price right now for hosting. So yeah, we are running a production, customer-facing application with a lot of traffic. I don't think the cost is prohibitive by any means. The data store, yes, data store is expensive. So if you use lots of data, let's say you store like a picture from webcam around the world, doing the data store for that would not be the best best use for you. Maybe you have to think about maybe the cloud SQL, maybe you have to think about the Google storage. So you have choices for sure. If you just use the bare-bones system and just try to apply it to your application, yeah, maybe it will be too expensive. So, but the benefit you get from this automatic scaling from 0 to infinity for the web serving, it's to me so valuable, you know. Honestly, something I like to put down as well for people telling me it's too expensive is if you were to factor the service fee and also and you remove the cost of the development of the low-level services you have to develop, and you remove the cost of your operational staff, because if you hire people full-time to monitor dashboards and to add more servers, to patch the servers, it costs a lot of money as well. So yeah, honestly, to us, you know, as package, yeah, the cost of App Engine is in line to what you would pay elsewhere with all scaling costs. So quick summary, and I'm done. So we have the platform if you use Java, Python, or Go to make your application scalable and in a very effective and simple way. For an early startup, when you have a small team, maybe a few co-founders, maybe a few employees, it allows your team to focus on what is important for your company, being quick to market, having a minimal viable product online, and an operation in very minimal time. So I think for all the companies starting today, it's amazing because you can do stuff now that you could not do 5 or 10 years ago. The platform was rough at the beginning. We went through some rough time for us, but now you have a very stable system with a SLA, that is 99.95, I think, SLA for big part of the system, not everything. So yeah, I think you can trust the premium support at the shell and the cake, because having someone at Google you can get in touch through a ticketing system in a very short period of time, yeah, it makes you stick with your for sure. So that's it. Just before I turn off this thing here, show you, this one is just, you have a nice dashboard that shows you a lot of data. It's just a screenshot I took over there. You see scalability, you can, and you have a lot of more data. But it's something kind of unrelated, but kind of related. I hear people recently telling me that competitive offers from other providers have a better integrated portal for all the services. Something that is not well known, and I think you should definitely look up, is on codegoogle.com/APIs/console. Google put in the one place all the set of APIs that you can turn on, turn off. You can see the quota that you are currently offered for free, or you can enable bidding for them. So just the Drive API, the Calendar API, the Book API, the Analytics API, all the APIs, and they are probably down to one level below the basement. So it's a very long list of APIs all under one portal now. So I just added that a few days ago because people ask me in the current meeting, yes, but we don't have that in Google. We have it. All right, I talked too much for too long, so and here, any questions?
I have a question to the data store. So you said data stores are slow and very expensive, so you probably use the Memcache for your application chat.
No. It's not too expensive. It's expensive, but it's expensive because it's distributed reliable and everything. So we use Memcache upfront before the data store to make sure we can read data quickly if we need to access them without hitting the data store. So basically speaking, what you do, when you write an object that you know you may need to read in a very near future, you write it both to the data store for legacy, because in Be There it's committed to be there for good, forever, and you put as well in Memcache, such as if you need it in a few seconds or a few minutes, you don't have to go to the data store and pay the 10 or 5x penalty of using it's low. Memcache is much faster and much cheaper.
Yeah, but the Memcache is like also distributed, or if it's like one is chatting from Australia and the other from the US, they share the same Memcache, or then you have to use the
applications are running right now in the US or in Europe. You decide at creation of the application.
So it's only one place.
It's only one place. The Memcache is with it. It's just something to keep in mind. Memcache may go down at any time, especially if, let's say, Google is right now running your app in North Carolina, and they need to move your app because of constraints or outage. when they move the app and restart it right away somewhere else, the mem cache is duplicated. Mem cache starts fresh, empty.
Okay.
So
how do you decide when you write the mem cache to the data
the
store?
decision for your design architecture is you write mem cache every time you make data in the very near future. That's the idea. If you know the data is for archiving purpose, you won't need it for maybe a few hours or a few days. You don't need mem cache because it will not stick there for very long.
Okay.
Is there an issue here when you're talking about scalability and optimizing too early? I would think that actually modifying your mem caching strategy is something that's relatively straightforward.
Yes, yeah.
So therefore, don't worry until you start to scale.
It's never too early, right?
Well, I don't know, for optimization.
What will be the point of hurting your application if you do mem cache from the start? It won't hurt, right?
There's no cost to it, is there?
No, it's just
Included, yeah,
a little bit CPU usage because you pay also for CPU hours, but there is no API code for it. So yeah, it's built into it. So yeah, it's something that I pointed to that is when you design your data store access, think of mem cache early because once you've done it, it's there. If
You abstract the problem, actually.
Yeah. And since they did this switch, adding the mem cache part of the API code of the high level for Python, they may even do it soon for Java as well. It would be nice.
Yeah.
I would love that. Because yeah, again, less things to think about, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
A question for it's something I read on the web a while ago, and I wanted to see if that's still the case. If you have a web app on App Engine that has very low usage, just some small niche or whatever, your family application or whatever, and there used to be a problem that if no one hits your application in a certain period of time, they basically remove it from the running apps, and then when the first requests come in, they need to start it up again, and it takes a few seconds.
You have to what they call the warm up. So
Okay, well.
it's a problem in Java mainly because warming up an application in Python is super quick. Warming up an application in Java, you have to start the JVM, go to your library. So
Okay.
it's a real problem, honestly, for people having low traffic applications which have loads of libraries. Like you use Spring, Spring Move, for example,
Yeah.
which is very heavy. So starting from no traffic to traffic with Spring, it's very painful. But yeah.
But are we talking about seconds or minutes?
No, it's seconds, yeah.
Okay, because then seconds is probably, for an app that has low traffic anyway, it's probably not so important.
For us, the warm-up, so warm-up even apply when you have traffic because when they add a new application, a new instance your application applied, this application has to warm up, this instance has to warm up. So for us at Ping, we will have a 8-second warm-up for this time. They improve a bit now. When you have traffic, they won't send traffic to an instance that is warming up. So yeah, but you have a good point here. For no traffic, it makes it, I don't have application with no traffic right now, so I cannot tell you, but it used to be a problem. What people were doing, they had a cron job that was just
Sitting in.
There is a setting now.
they block it now.
There is a setting, we improved it, there is a setting where...
But you have to pay the setting. You have to start paying. It's only you have no traffic and you want to pay.
But if it's a problem, you can do it.
Right. Yeah. You didn't talk about price. If you are developing the free quota, that you pretty much to one instance completely through the day for free, and you have some quota as well for data store, for storage, for read, write, everything. The quota used to be something was crazy. They were giving way too much for free. For early beta players, we didn't pay a penny for with real customers of the beta. Now you can do a real job for free. But yeah, now if you have low traffic, that's right. If you're willing to pay, you just say, I want to keep at least one instance warm all the time, and they won't shut that down. If they have to shut it down to move it, they will warm up right away for you, so it's ready. So yeah,
Okay.
it's a setting very good. Anything else? If not, yeah, I'll stick around. We can talk about for lunch about more details. Yeah, I hope it was useful. And feel free to contact me if you need anything. Jerome.mouton@starpackage.com, or we're a license company, so come to our website and you can even ask the operator to talk to me. I'm more than happy to answer questions.